Chapter 19. A Missing Suspect. To avoid meeting Alex or any of the Haver family, Nancy, Bess, and George slipped quietly down the back stairs and left the mansion. They hurried to their car and drove to Mrs. Farwell's home. Nancy rang the bell and Mr. de Laverne opened the door. He bowed, then said, "This is an unexpected pleasure. Please come in." The girls stepped inside, and Nancy introduced the elderly man to her friends. After greeting them, he indicated a small living room filled with beautiful antique mahogany furniture. When they were seated, Nancy drew the jeweled hairpin from her purse. "I came to return this," she said. Henry de Laverne hesitated a moment, then arose. "My sister's not too well today, but I will see if she is able to join us." He was gone fully 5 minutes, but at last returned with Mrs. Farwell. Though her face was lined and her eyes slightly dulled because of her failing health, she was still a very pretty woman. The girls were touched by the affectionate and chivalrous manner with which her brother treated her. The callers arose, and he introduced them. Mrs. Farwell nodded her head graciously as each girl was named. "I found one of your valued possessions, Mrs. Farwell," said Nancy. "I'm so happy to be able to return it to you." Louvina Farwell took the proffered hairpin and stared at it for several seconds. Then she stood up very straight, gave a little toss of her head, and looked directly at the girl detective. To Nancy's astonishment, the woman's eyes indicated she was perfectly rational. "Do sit down again, my dears," urged Mrs. Farwell. After her brother had helped her in a chair, the woman asked, "And where did you find my missing heirloom, Nancy?" "On the old showboat, the River Princess." "How very odd," Louvina remarked. "I feel so sorry about the River Princess. Henry and I had such wonderful times on it when we were children. It is too bad that storm and flood ruined it." "Would you like to see the River Princess restored and moved out of the bayou?" George asked. "Indeed I would," Mrs. Farwell replied promptly. "And I would like to see performances given on it again." She turned to her brother. "Wouldn't it be fun, Henry, to go to one of those old-time shows again?" "Yes, it would," Henry replied. He gave Nancy a surprised glance, as if to say, "I was all wrong about the effect on my sister of the restoration of the River Princess." Nancy, encouraged by the friendly trend of the conversation, asked impulsively, "Before your grandfather owned the showboat, did pirates ever pilot her?" "Oh, no," Henry answered quickly. Then, as his sister started to speak, he tried to switch to another topic of discussion. But Louvina would not be diverted from the pirate story. She laughed as if in recollection, and her eyes lost some of their dimness. She said, "Nancy, my dear, no pirate ever owned the River Princess. But there was a story that several of them hid a chest of gold coins under a bulkhead of the showboat during the time my grandfather owned it. This happened when no one was aboard." "Oh, how exciting!" Bess burst out. "Did they return to get them?" "Not that anyone ever knew," Mrs. Farwell replied. "As a matter of fact, some very disparaging remarks were made about my wonderful grandfather. People said he was in league with the pirates." "Why, how dreadful!" said Bess. "It certainly was," Mr. de Laverne agreed. "Well, now that my sister has told you of our family skeleton, I'll finish the story. I myself looked for that pirate gold many times before the River Princess was abandoned, but it never came to light." Nancy was convinced now that at last she had discovered the reason for the showboats being haunted. At the present time, someone who had learned of the old story was trying to find the pirate gold. and did not intend to have anyone interfere with his endeavor. "Just today," Nancy said aloud, "I asked Uncle Rufus to watch the River Princess at night and report to me anything strange he saw going on there. He overheard a remark in which I think you'll be interested." The young detective told about the two men in the canoe and their mention of pirate gold. "I'm sure they'll never find it," said Henry de Laverne, "'cause the whole story probably was made up by some showboat rivals of my grandfather's." Louvina backed up her brother in this theory. Then suddenly she said, "I am very tired. If the girls will excuse me, I think I'll go to my room and lie down." "Oh, please do," said Nancy quickly. "But Mr. de Laverne, may we stay a little longer and talk to you? I want to ask you some questions about Oxford University." "I shall be happy to answer them," the elderly man said with enthusiasm. "I'll be back in a few minutes." He assisted his sister from the room, but returned shortly. Briefly, Nancy told about Alex Upgrove and that his engagement to Donna May Haver was to be announced at a ball the Havers were giving. "Here is a picture of Alex taken at Oxford. I was wondering if you could find him in your directory of graduates." The elderly man took the photograph. Then he ushered the visitors into an adjoining room, which was lined with bookshelves, and pulled out several volumes. Presently he announced to the girls that an Alex Upgrove from New York City was indeed a graduate of Oxford University. Mr. de Laverne then looked through a volume of pictures. This book was put back on the shelf, and he took down another. Presently he exclaimed, "I found what you're looking for!" The girls eagerly crowded around him and looked at the group photograph. It was exactly like the one which George had borrowed from Alex Upgrove. But the face of the man who stood in the place indicated for Alex was not that of the man they knew at Sunnymead. "George, you were right about Alex being a fake!" Bess cried out. "This is very unfortunate," said Mr. de Laverne. Nancy raised her head thoughtfully. As she stared out a window, she was startled by a face framed in one of the panes. Alex Upgrove! When the young man realized that Nancy had caught him spying, he took to his heels and sprinted out of sight. Nancy alerted the others, and the three girls dashed from the house after him. A few minutes later, the roar of a car some distance away told them that he had escaped. "I'll bet he'll never show up at Sunnymead again," George predicted. "Well, that's fine with me," Bess declared. "I'm glad for Donna May's sake that he's been found out. Maybe now she'll come to her senses and be her former self." They returned to the house and apologized to Mr. de Laverne for their hasty exit. "I'm sorry you didn't catch up with that pretender," he said. "I will notify the university of what has happened. While you were gone, I studied the photograph you brought under a magnifying glass. There has been a very clever photographic substitution." "This Alex Upgrove, if that's his name," said George, "must be after big stakes to have gone to so much trouble." "I'll bet he's after the pirate gold," Bess ventured. The girls thanked Mr. de Laverne for his help, then said goodbye and hurried back towards Sunnymead. "How in the world are we ever going to tell Donna May the truth?" Bess asked apprehensively. "Maybe we won't have to," Nancy suggested. "She may find out about Alex herself." When the girls drove into the parking area of the Havers estate, they gave gasps of surprise and delight. On the patio with Donna May were three boys: tall, athletic, brown-eyed Ned Nickerson, blonde, heavy-set Bert Eddleton, and rangy-built, green-eyed Dave Evans. The girls hurried to greet them. "We convinced the university we ought to look over the football situation down here for next year," Ned said with a laugh after greetings were over. and it happened to coincide with a mid-year vacation. Bert grinned. In the conversation which followed, Nancy noticed that Donna May was unusually charming and gracious. She exhibited such happiness that the other girls were sure she had heard nothing adverse yet about Alex Upgrove. And how they hated to tell her! Suddenly, Donna May announced, "Dinner will be served soon. We won't wait for Alex. He had to go out and said he might be detained." The girls exchanged quick glances but made no comment. Excusing themselves, they hurried upstairs to change into flowered bouffant dresses. "For the sake of Ned, Bert, and Dave," said Nancy, as she and the others started downstairs, "I suggest that we be as gay as possible during dinner. If Alex doesn't show up later on, then we'll have to tell Donna May what we've learned about him." Though at times it was difficult for the three girls to play their light-hearted parts, they succeeded very well. But later, on the terrace, Colonel and Mrs. Haver brought up the subject of Alex. "Where did he go?" they asked their daughter. Donna May said she did not know. Another hour went by. Still he did not come. Nancy took Ned aside and whispered the news about Alex. "If you don't mind, I'd like to tell the Havers privately what I know." Ned chuckled. "I can take a hint," he said, grinning. "I might have known you'd have a big mystery to solve. Okay, we fellows will hit the sack." Presently, he and his friends excused themselves and went upstairs. Donna May fidgeted, then said worriedly, "I can't understand where Alex is." Nancy decided not to wait any longer in revealing what she had discovered. She walked over to Donna May and her parents. "I'm afraid that Alex is not coming back," she said gently. "Bess and George and I learned earlier this evening that he has been misrepresenting his background. He was there when we found it out, and he ran away." "What do you mean?" Donna May asked quickly. Nancy told about the substitution in the photograph. Colonel Haver's jaw set firmly. Donna May went white, and the others thought she was going to faint. But suddenly she began to cry. "That dreadful, that deceiving, that horrid man!" she burst out. Mrs. Haver, who was seated beside Donna May, put an arm around her daughter. "This is hard, I know, dear, but think of the disgrace and unhappiness for you if you had married a person like that. We all have probably been spared a great deal of embarrassment, too." Her mother's words made little impression on Donna May. She could think of nothing but the overwhelming chagrin of the moment. As she alternately wept and laughed hysterically, her father asked Nancy if she thought Alex was in any way connected with the mystery of the showboat. "I'm afraid that he is," the young detective replied. "In fact, I am convinced Alex is in league with the man who stole my car, and that many other strange things which happened were meant to keep me from coming here to solve the mystery." "But what is the mystery?" Colonel Haver asked. Nancy told him of the rumor about pirate gold being hidden on the River Princess. The Havers were amazed to hear this. They eagerly discussed the possibility of the ancient coins being on the showboat. Donna May momentarily forgot her troubles and even joined in the conversation. But as the group started for bed, she again broke into another fit of hysteria. Nancy went to Donna May's room with her and tried to soothe the agitated girl. To the young detective's wonder, Donna May revealed a new worry. "Nancy, I've just realized what a dreadful thing I've done to Charles, and he didn't deserve it." Although Nancy felt sorry for the girl and was sure Donna May still loved Charles, she was a little irked at her fickleness. Nevertheless, she endeavored to comfort Donna May, who finally fell asleep. The next morning, Donna May appeared quite composed. She talked very little during breakfast, but later asked the three girls to come to her room. To their surprise and relief, Donna May seemed to have a more mature attitude. "I've been very stupid," she said. "All this has taught me a good lesson, and I know now that I still love Charles, and have all the time. I shan't go running after him, but if he'll take me back, I'll be very happy." The girls had no chance to comment, for just then Mammy Matilda knocked on the door to say that Captain Runcie, the towboat owner, was downstairs. "Colonel Haver would like you all to come and talk with him." When they reached the first floor, Colonel Haver said, "Nancy, you and Bess and George have done such a wonderful job so far in solving the Sunnymead mystery. I want you to take over the final part. I suggest that you three and Ned, Bert, and Dave go with Captain Runcie to the River Princess. He will see what he can do about moving it." The girls were delighted with this arrangement, and 3 canoes were brought to the dock. Nancy and Ned stepped into the first craft and took Captain Runcie with them. When the group reached the River Princess, the towboat owner said he would remain outside and make some calculations. The 3 girls began showing their escorts around the showboat. Ned, poking into various crannies with his flashlight, said laughingly, "I'm not going to give up until I find that pirate treasure." In their search, he and Nancy finally reached the hold of the old vessel. Walking on the dry part, they beamed the light back and forth. Suddenly, Nancy stooped down and said, "Ned, here's something interesting I missed before. They may be a clue." She pointed to a series of knotholes on one of the wide boards in the center of the deck. "But this isn't under a bulkhead, as the legend said," Ned objected. Nancy smiled. "Those pirates were clever. Do you realize we're standing under a bulkhead of the theater on the upper deck? Ned, let's try lifting up this board." "Okay, but with what?" Ned asked, looking about. Not far away, Nancy spotted a crowbar, which she had seen Charles use the day she had visited the boat the first time. Ned hurried to pick it up, then started to pry up the section of floor. Nancy waited breathlessly. Would her hunch pay off? Suddenly, with a ripping sound, the floorboard came up. "Oh!" she exclaimed excitedly. Beneath the board was another board, old and rotted, and below this, a metal chest. Nancy and Ned, after a few tugs, lifted the lid, revealing a mass of gold coins. "We found it! We found it!" Ned cried out. He ran his hand through the coins. "There must be $50,000 worth." As he and Nancy did a little dance together to express their glee, they were completely unaware of 2 sinister figures who suddenly arose from behind a pile of crates and rags nearby. The 2 men held stout sticks in their hands. Quietly and stealthily, they leaped toward the couple and brought the sticks down full force on their heads. Nancy and Ned slumped to the deck. Above, Bess and Dave were just completing a tour of the first deck. A few minutes later, they came toward the entrance to the hold. Bess suddenly yelled in alarm. "Smoke's coming from the hold! The showboat's on fire! Nancy and Ned are down there!" End of chapter 19.